The Jets are a bit up and down in their training camp scrimmage, as expected, but there is some undeniable good news coming from Saturday's scrimmage. We'll get to it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, August 5th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs have wound down, the sports have stopped sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, the Jets held their training camp scrimmage on Saturday. And if you're not familiar with the Jets' training camp schedule, typically the weekend before their opening preseason game, they kind of ramp things up a little bit. They have a scrimmage. And, these scrimmages always kind of have the same result to them. It's always a bit of a mixed day. And that's just the nature of training camp. So you see a lot of the reports coming out, they're saying, well, there was some good, some bad. That's the way these things work in training camp, not just in the scrimmage, but in these training camp practices in general. And there's a very simple reason for that. I'm sure you could probably guess it, is that when it's Jets versus Jets, somebody's success comes at the expense of one of his teammates. If the Jets offense does well, it means the defense is doing poorly, and vice versa. So it never ceases to make me chuckle every year when we look at this scrimmage where you say, well, there was some good and some bad coming out of the reports. But I think that there was one very good piece of news, and I think it's a relatively minor piece of news in the big picture. But by all accounts, Aaron Rodgers looked really sharp. Rich Cimini of ESPN actually tallied the stats, and Rodgers was 19 of 30 for 210 yards. By all accounts, he looked pretty good, made a couple plays outside the pocket on the move while playing mostly from the pocket. That's it's kind of like just like another check on Rodgers' road to recovery. It's not necessarily the biggest thing in the world. In fact, I think we're all expecting Rodgers to go out and play really well this year. It would be a surprise if he didn't. But this is just another step he had to take. He's been playing in practices. He hasn't missed a practice rep at all in preseason so far this year. And now he got into a situation that's a little bit more like a game situation. It's not entirely a game situation. You still can't hit the quarterback. So that'll be kind of the next benchmark. And, Rodgers, it sounds like Jets are kind of leaning towards not playing him at all in preseason. So that'll, it'll come week one, after you take that first hit. That tends to be a big deal. When you're coming back from a serious injury, a lot of players will tell you that they're always a little nervous until they take that first hit. And then once they see they're okay after that first hit, it's kind of a release point for them. But Rodgers, to the extent it matters, checks another box off. Plays pretty well, and you'd expect it. The brain is as smart as ever when we're talking about what Aaron Rodgers does on the football field. He can decipher defenses at a level that few quarterbacks could ever approach in the history of the game. And by all accounts, he looked very sharp on Saturday. The rest of it, Jets offense put together some drives, an 11-play drive, a 17-play drive, but they were not able to put the ball in the end zone. They had some miscues when they got to scoring range. Joe Tippmann continues to maybe struggle a little bit with his snaps. He apparently airmailed a shotgun snap to Rodgers, which kind of derailed a drive and a goal-to-go situation. So that's becoming one of the ongoing stories of training camp, Tippmann snapping. There's some rising concern over it. I said last week that I'm not super worried about it. But, you're getting to a point where you'd like to see it go away. Tippmann's obviously an important player for the Jets this year, second-year center. Big things expected from him, and, still continuing to, have a few issues with the snaps. We're still over a month away from the start of the real game, so we get closer to the real games. If this is still happening, maybe I'll start to raise my eyebrow a little bit. I still think that there's a lot of time to overcome this. I think that there's a very good chance that we'll remember this. We won't remember this once the season starts. This will be an afterthought. Nobody will ever think of it because Tippmann's been playing center a long time. This isn't the first time he's snapping the. If Tippmann had played guard his whole career and the Jets were saying, let's try him at center, then I'd be a little worried about that. But, I think that he'll figure this out. Beyond that, another drive was stalled. Rookie Isaiah Davis fumbling. It's a rookie. That's what happens with rookies. Rookies make mistakes. I think back to Hard Knocks 2010, Rex Ryan's coming, nothing worse than a fumbler. And it's true, but you know what? You're dealing with a rookie in his first training camp. It's going to happen. The Jets, the scoring system for the scrimmages has changed through the years. It depends on the coaching staff. Rex Ryan did it differently from Todd Bowles. And Todd Bowles didn't even really do it full scrimmage. It was just a lot of drills. Adam Gase did it differently from Robert Saleh. Apparently, even though the offense did not put the ball in the end zone, they were ruled the winner. This was offense versus defense. I'm not even going to begin to try and understand the scoring system. But, a couple standouts by most accounts. Jamian Sherwood stood out. Sherwood having a strong camp. He's that number 3 linebacker behind Quincy Williams and CJ Mosley. And in today's NFL, your number 3 linebacker and the defensive style of the Jets runs is actually like a part-time player. Back in the old days, when you're in a 4-3 defense, Sherwood would be a starter. But the third linebacker is he's a somewhat important player for the Jets on defense because Sherwood, especially a guy who's kind of like a safety linebacker hybrid. He's the guy who, when other teams go with big formations, when they play 2 tight ends or when they, put a fullback in there, Sherwood's going to have a role. And the Jets will be expecting him to play well. So Sherwood continues to have a fairly strong training camp. There was also apparently, a few moments where things got heated. A recently signed corner, Trace Willing, and Irv Charles, who's a special teams ace for the Jets, technically a wide receiver, but really more of a special teams coverage guy, an excellent guy in that area. They kind of got into it. There was apparently one moment with Lazard where, things got heated. And, these things always generate a lot of attention, but I don't know that they necessarily should. Players will tell you that, a few weeks into training camp, you're going up against the same guy every single day. And it just gets frustrating. And when you're going up against the same guy every single day, eventually things get heated. This stuff happens. It's not really a big deal. Again, you want to talk about afterthoughts. Nobody's going to remember a couple altercations at the Green and White Scrimmage once the real games start. I think the best thing about the way the calendar is right now is the Jets have a game this coming weekend. We're finally in a game week, even though it's an exhibition game. The Jets will play against the Washington Commanders, and having spoken with some guys who have played not just in the pros but in college about the whole training camp experience about getting ready for the season, they say that the best thing is when you look across the line of scrimmage and there's a guy wearing a different color, because you're so tired of hitting guys in green or whatever color your team is. It's nice to be able to compete against somebody else. So the exhibition season beginning, not a moment too soon. And, the Jets gave some reps to some other players this weekend. Michael Carter II's still injured. He's out. We'll have an update on him in a little bit on the show. Sauce Gardner missed the practice for a couple. I guess there was some sort of travel issue with him. Sauce is fine though. And there was another guy, Tyron Smith, got the day off. And ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk about the guy who replaced Tyron Smith in this practice, and the guy who probably will replace him in the starting lineup next year. That's Olu Fashanu. Fashanu, by most accounts, it was an uneven day, but I still think it's a plus, even if it wasn't on the even day. And I'll explain why continuing here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or therapy day. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. And even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Therapy has so many benefits. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for those who've experienced major trauma. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you every dayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today we're talking about the Green and White Scrimmage, which took place Saturday at the team facility in Florham Park. It's interesting that it's in Florham Park this year. They've moved this practice around a lot through the years. There have been a lot of years it's been at MetLife Stadium. I think there was even one year where it was at Rutgers. I actually almost went to that one. But the Jets conduct their scrimmage, which I guess to the extent training camp practices can resemble a game, probably the closest to a game simulation the Jets can get. And they always have it the week before they open the preseason. So it's kind of like the ramping up process where now we're going to simulate a game and then we get to the exhibition season. And then after the exhibition season, we get to the real games, the regular season. We can't wait for that. Olu Fashanu got the start at left tackle for the Jets at this training camp scrimmage. Tyron Smith they just gave him the day off. It's what's known as a veterans maintenance day. I think they probably built in the one that resembles a game. I bet you anything they planned out in advance. Let's keep Smith out of the game situation. Smith's 33 years old. When you're dealing with veterans, a lot of coaches will tell you got to give them days off because the body does not respond as well as it used to. And I remember the iconic, maybe the greatest linebacker of all time, Ray Lewis. He played into his late 30s. He played till he was like 37, 38. I remember hearing him say that once when in the later stages of his career, once the season got to like November, December, it took him 15 minutes to get out of bed in the morning because he was so beat up because his body just did not respond the way it did in the past. So Jets give Tyron Smith the day off over maybe the most grueling practice they're going to have, which was a smart move because 33 years old and also a guy, if we're going to be honest, who's a pretty big injury risk. So but beyond that, I think that there's a lot of benefit to giving Olu Fashanu some reps. And a lot of the reports that came out suggested Fashanu was uneven, that he struggled against Jermaine Johnson. And my response to that would be, are we surprised by that? Now, Fashanu apparently had some good reps. It was not a complete disaster, but this is why you put Olu Fashanu out there. That's why you have the reps. Kind of like the first segment, we talked about some of the miscues the offense had. When we talk about offensive miscues, well, it's training camp. That's why they're practicing. They're trying to hammer these things out. And for Fashanu, it's about getting used to playing against NFL competition. It's the first time he's done it. He's played against college competition in the past. And I think sometimes we underestimate the learning curve from college to the pros. And I think that putting him in situations like this where there's low pressure, because at the end of the day, Rodgers can't get in these practices. And it's low pressure from the standpoint, the Jets aren't, the scrimmage certainly doesn't count against the Jets' record in the standings. It does, it doesn't have anything to do with their place in trying to win the AFC East or trying to gain playoff seeding. These are the perfect scenarios to get Olu Fashanu some work. And I think that, there's probably a dual reasoning behind sitting Smith out. First of all, you don't want to risk him getting injured because he's a critical player for the team this year. So you don't want to risk him getting injured in a practice that maybe is a little bit higher intensity than usual because, Smith's older. And again, he's got a history for missing time due to injuries. You don't want to increase that risk. But beyond that, again, these reps are going to be valuable for Fashanu. And, if you're surprised that Fashanu is a little up and down, well, consider a couple things. First of all, Jermaine Johnson's really good. Jermaine Johnson went to the Pro Bowl last year. And again, for the Jets now, any good, until they start playing real games, it's a zero-sum game. Any time a Jets player succeeds in these practices, it comes at the expense of another Jets player. But beyond that, there's a reason the Jets signed Tyron Smith. And look, they didn't. I don't think they knew they were going to draft Fashanu when they signed Smith. But rookies at the tackle position, it's more just about survival than it is thriving. Occasionally you'll have a guy who steps in and is rock solid on day one. But you can look through the list of recently drafted tackles. I'm not talking, guys who were drafted in round 5, guys who were drafted in the first round, top 20 picks who are on even their rookie seasons. If you get a guy who can, hold his own, a guy who, is treading water, you're doing okay. Jets, I think, wanted to do a little bit better than that. That's why they got Tyron Smith. Tyron Smith's a game changer if he's healthy. He's a guy who doesn't just lock down the left tackle position. He makes the rest of the line better. Offensive lines function as a unit. I think John Simpson's going to be a lot better having Tyron Smith next to him than he would be otherwise. So, the point of, I think the Jets have handled this tackle position pretty well, or at least as well as they could have this past offseason. Now, I'm not going to defend Joe Douglas's overall body of work on the offensive line because there's no defense of it. There's been some bad luck, but there have also been a lot of decisions that have not panned out for him. So don't get me wrong. Don't send me messages or emails about how I'm, being too kind to Joe Douglas's offensive line hand, because I'm not. He's overall, the body of work's not good enough. However, this past offseason, I think there were moves that were very sensible. I think drafting Fashanu was essential. I think that the Jets did not have a long-term starter at either tackle spot heading into this offseason. So drafting somebody in the first round, that was a key move for this team. But it's better that Fashanu's not pressed into the starting lineup. A lot of situations, you have to throw a rookie right out there, and you have to live with the results. And I do think Fashanu stands a chance of being able to hold his own. I think he's got a shot of, hanging in there if he's called upon. And there's value in that. If we're talking about your top backup tackle, if that's a guy who can hold his own, who just holds the fort, that's good enough. I mean, look at some of the guys the Jets have been putting on the field at the tackle position over the last couple of years. I don't need to tell you how valuable it is to have a guy who can just kind of hang in there, a guy who's not going to be a disaster. And I think those are the expectations for Fashanu. For Smith, the expectations are to dominate. This guy has been one of the greatest tackles of his generation. So you're going to get a higher level play out of Tyron Smith than you would out of Fashanu, and that's natural. But these reps are important. You see, I see reports of people talking Fashanu struggling. Well, it's not the worst thing in the world, because now he'll be able to go back. He'll be able to review that film. He'll be able to see, what did Jermaine do against me, because that's what other pass rushers are going to do against him. You can see where things went wrong, and you can fix them. That's what practice is for. Practice is for improving. Practice is for getting better. And I think that sometimes that's lost. Sometimes we're so caught up in the day-to-day, who's up, who's down, who's playing well, who's playing poorly. And these things matter to a degree. Certainly when we're talking about position battles, they matter. Certainly when we're talking about a player's trajectory, they matter. But I think it's easy to lose perspective that practice is practice. And part of the reason you practice is to get better, especially when you're a rookie, especially when you're an offensive lineman going up against a Pro Bowl defensive end. So I think that, there should be no concerns over Olu Fashanu struggling, because there were some, by all accounts, there were some moments where he looked quite good on Saturday. And this is to be expected. A talented young guy who's adjusting to the NFL, could be some ups, there are going to be some downs. That's just how it works. Now, head on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to guys who have been injured, guys who have been injured for the Jets. A couple positive updates we have from them. We've talked about Tyron Smith, who's not injured, but a couple guys, including one who plays a similar position to Tyron Smith, on the mend. And we'll talk about who they are and when they could be back, continuing here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But the playoffs have wound down in basketball and hockey. Now we've got fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to. But FanDuel helps us keep the sports going whenever we want, because all we have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. Of course, it's baseball season, Yankees and Mets trying to make pushes. If you're a New York baseball fan, maybe you want to get in on the action on FanDuel. And look, there are some Jets fans who root for teams outside the area. FanDuel's the place to go. And you can also put money down on the Jets. Jets expected to have a big season. FanDuel's got some over-unders. Jets are underdogs week 1 in San Francisco. So if you think that they're going to win that game, again, FanDuel's the place to be, because this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. We have a couple injury updates to get to. First is some good news around Morgan Moses. He's back in team drills. He returned to the drills late last week. He had been kind of working on a reduced schedule. Last year with Baltimore, he tore his pec muscle and missed 3 games. I think it was the first time in 9 years he missed any action. And it was actually pretty impressive that he played, because the doctors wanted to shut him down. It shows you how tough Morgan Moses is, because the doctors wanted to shut him down for the season. And he only missed 3 games. Now he was platooning on the offensive line at the right tackle position for Baltimore for a little bit. But he played most of the season last year, and he played with a very, very painful injury. But he had off-season surgery to correct the issue with the pec muscle, and he's back in drill. So it looks like full speed ahead for Morgan Moses, another player who's very important. With Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses as your bookend tackles, this offensive line suddenly looks like it's shaping up, because you got proven guys. And when I say proven guys, you're not talking about Dwayne Brown level of proven, where it was proven he was really good in the past. You still have guys who are playing at a pretty good level, because even with that injury Morgan Moses had last season, he still played well. And he was still very good for Baltimore. I don't think that the Ravens trading him had much to do with his level of performance. I think they had, a couple of young guys they like to take a look at. It felt like Moses was leaving next season anyway, because he's about to be a free agent. So let's get something in exchange for him. Moses on track to be ready for week 1. And that's the case with most of these injuries. Most of these training camp injuries are not particularly big deals. And part of it's just we have such a long runway between training camp and the start of the season. I mean, think about how long we've been in training camp a couple of weeks now. And we're still more than a month away from the Jets week 1 game against San Francisco. So there's lots of times, unless you suffer a major injury, these things aren't really that big of a deal in training camp. And Robert Saleh provided an update on Michael Carter II, the great slot corner the Jets have. Carter suffered an ankle injury last week, and Saleh expects it to be another week or two for Carter to get back in the lineup. And of course, at this point of the year, there's no point in rushing it. In fact, as we talked about with Fashanu, the established players, missing these practices, in some ways, there's almost like a hidden benefit, because you get younger guys who need the reps. These practice, look, you want Carter to be back maybe a week before the season, maybe 2 weeks before the season starts, because you want him to be sharp. You want him to be, ready to go. But it was missing a couple weeks of practice at this point in August really going to do much for Michael Carter II? Is it really going to hurt him that much? I would argue no. And instead you get guys who are able to step up. You get a younger guy, a corner who's able to step into a bigger role, go up against tougher competition. Again, better opportunities for younger players to get reps and develop. And maybe the biggest news from that scrimmage, it doesn't sound like the Jets suffered any major injuries. So that's a very positive thing for this team. And like, as much as we break down what's happening in these training camps and in these exhibition games, for me, like, there's one way you win training camp. There's one way you win the preseason. And that's don't suffer any critical injuries, because we've seen this in the past. If you're a Jets fan, you've seen it. You see it across the league. The most lasting impact any preseason, any training camp, any exhibition period has on your actual games are the injuries. If you lose a key guy for an extended stretch of time, much less a season. I mean, you can think about the years the Jets have lost key guys in the preseason. I don't know why this is the one that comes to mind, but 21 years ago, Chad Pennington suffered an injury in the preseason game against the Giants and completely derailed the 2003 season before it got underway. Pennington came back eventually, but the Jets got off to a terrible start that year, and Pennington really wasn't the same the rest of that season. And you could go down the list. So I think just avoiding injuries, just not having any of those, that's a positive for the Jets. And it sounds like to the extent that the scrimmages are more grueling, and these are controlled situations, but these scrimmages are a bit more grueling than the typical practice, because they're trying to simulate game situations as best they can. Sounds like the Jets made it through unscathed. Always the balance. You want to keep your guys sharp. You want to get your guys prepared for the season, but you also want to avoid injury. Sounds like the Jets, maybe have done both, maybe did both of those on Saturday. And now we look ahead to this weekend's game against the Washington Commanders. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening, so that you never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show or listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.